Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Maya and this is Inspired by Maya. So in today's video, I'm going to be making a summer dress. Now I say summer dress with bunny marks because it's a very covered up dress. It's more spring, but the colour is summer. I'm using this lime, this warm apple green, I would say. It's a beautiful fabric which I've been sitting on for too long. Anyways, yeah, this is the dress that really inspired me that I'm going to be recreating. It's like a maxi mid-axi dress with a chest cutout. As you can tell, I really like my cutouts, but you know, a lot of the cutouts like dresses and tops that are on the market now, I just feel like they're too risky, and so I don't feel comfortable wearing that stuff, but this one seemed okay, so I'm gonna try and recreate that. My first time doing a cutout actually. Also the dress that I'm following has a high neck, but I don't know if I'm going to do a high neck yet. Once I make it, I'll kind of just decide. Now the dress also has long sleeves, which I'm a fan of because my arms always get cold, but also in the UK it's just, the weather is just so unpredictable. We go through every single season in one day, so it's just better to be safe than sorry. So long sleeves, at least that way I can wear it a bit more, you know, all year round. Also the about the maxi midi situation, I think I'm gonna add a split down the side just because I think it looks better and it makes it easier to walk about in. But I think that's everything in regards to design features of the dress, and I'm really excited to make this. I've already cut out my pieces, the pattern's made, and the pattern will be on my Etsy page. The link will be in the description box down below, and if you don't know already, I have some other patterns listed on there. So I have the corset blouse, my cowl neck top, a bucket hat, and the ruched center top, which are all tutorials on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't watched them already. And the last thing, if you haven't already, please can you follow my social medias. My Instagram is inspiredbymaya.uk and my TikTok is just inspiredbymaya. I think I'm gonna start posting more behind the scenes stuff that I don't really put in my YouTube videos, like the pattern making, because if I put it in my YouTube videos, I feel like it gets a little bit confusing because I don't know how to do it correctly the first time round. So it's a lot of trial and error, whereas if I put it on my Instagram story or on TikTok, it's I don't know, it just makes it a bit more engaging. I don't know. So yeah, I think I might start doing that. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I got a cold, so I sound really nasally, so sorry about that. This voiceover is going to be disgusting. Anyways, let's get on into the video. So the first thing I did was cut my pieces out. I cut one of the back and one of the front. The back is cut on the fold because it's the same on both sides, and the front is a full front cut because we have that cut out detail. So here's the front pieces of the dress, and the first thing that I'm going to do is overlock the cutout areas. So I'm just going to make the 2 small stitches on the chest cutout pieces, and my seam allowance that I'm using is 0.6 centimeters, but obviously in the pattern there won't be any seam allowance on it, so you can decide how much you want to add because obviously you might want to do a different type of seam. Also, I'm using a zigzag stitch because we're working with stretchy fabric. I realized I didn't talk about my needle or foot, so I'm using a walking foot which does what it says, just walks on the fabric instead of dragging it through like a normal foot. This allows our stretchy fabric to stay taut because if it stretches, we'll have puckers in our garment. And if you don't have a walking foot, another method to try and prevent this is by using a stabilizer and then removing it once you've completed the stitch. So I've done the connecting seams at the cutout points, and I've gone down about 1.5 centimeters. And once we've done that, you'll see that the cutout wants to start folding in. So we're just going to hem all around this cutout area, and again I suggest using a zigzag stitch so that it stretches. So I've just pinned the cutout now, but to help me be a bit more accurate with my sewing, I'm just going to give it an iron so that the seam line here, the hemline creases, which will make it easier for me to sew. So I gotta cut it here because everything changed. I hate making my tutorials like this, but it's just the process. Sometimes sewing involves a lot of trial and error, but this is my learning journey, so please bear with me. But basically, I didn't end up sewing my cutout like this because 1, I used more seam allowance than what I added in onto my pattern, which was silly of me because of course it would affect the fit. 2, it made the shoulder smaller on one side, which means it doesn't match the back shoulder and affects the fit of the sleeve, which I ended up leaving in the end. This method would have worked, but I messed up because I used more seam allowance than I should have, so I ended up sewing it this way instead. I can't remember if I recorded it, but I ended up cutting another front piece, overlocking and hemming them first. Then I stitched the sides together with a tack instead of a seam. It's gonna seem very unstable at first, but I promise you its strength will be fortified. It still could have worked if I unpicked the hem and seam, but I didn't want to do all that and thought it'd be easier to just cut another one out. Here's the one I ended up using. Looks very fragile and loose compared to the other one, but trust me, the hemming method I use ensures it has strength. So like I explained earlier, I just tacked the pieces together so they're just touching and not overlapping. Next I sewed the back shoulders on. I overlocked the seam and then sewed my 0.6cm seam allowance. I still want to explain the 2 ways to do the sleeves if you wanted to, because this would be the part where you add that in. I did do it on my first attempt of the dress, so I'll show you the method I was going to do and then I'll demonstrate the second. So for the first method, you need to sew the side seam with the overlocker and do a zigzag stitch. Then sew the sides of the sleeves right sides facing. Turn the dress wrong sides facing out. Place the sleeve right sides facing the dress, and then match up the side seam of the dress and sleeve and pin and sew all around. I like this method because it can make it easier to adjust or take the sleeve off in my opinion. For method 2, place your sleeve right sides facing the fabric, pin into the armhole curve. Stretchy patterns don't usually have ease, which is just a couple centimeters of extra fabric, because it can cause rippling in the fabric as you may end up stretching it whilst pinning. Fold the dress so it's right sides facing and sew along the side seam of the dress from the bottom of the sleeve to the hem. Now back to the actual version. So I've finished sewing the shoulders up. Now we're going to work on the side seams. So I've just overlocked both front and back separately, and this is because I want to add a slit onto the skirt bit, but I've decided that I want a slit on both sides. If you don't want a slit, you can literally just pin these together and overlock it with 1 stitch, but obviously it takes a little bit more work to do the split. If you didn't want to split, you can just pin these side seams together and just do an overlock stitch and then obviously reinforce it with your sewing machine. But I'm just going to start sewing down the side seams, then I'm going to stop about here and then I'm going to hem it. So after I sewed the shoulders on, I closed my side seams. If you want a split, you need to mark that on both sides of the dress. Don't forget to include your hemming allowance in your calculation. Then overlock each side separately and pin your dress together right sides facing, matching up your underarm seams, then stitch to your mark with a zigzag stitch. To complete the split, we have to do something called a pivot stitch, which is really easy. We use the machine to do all the hard work. So pin the length of your split in by your seam allowance and make sure the seam allowance is an open seam. Then starting from the bottom of the dress, stitch up till you reach the closing point. Keep your needle in the fabric, raise your presser foot and turn the fabric 90 degrees so you're sewing straight again. Then do the same for the next corner and continue back down to the bottom. Don't forget to backstitch to secure it in place. You may want to interface this bit with a really lightweight interfacing or something you can tear off after, because it is easy to create ripples on this seam by accidentally stretching the fabric too much. Now that that's done, you can go ahead and hem the bottom of your dress. Make sure you've overlocked it first so your inside looks nice and neat, then go ahead and zigzag it. A little tip for hemming stretchy fabrics is to make your zigzag stitch a little bit wider and longer, and also stabilize the fabric when you're sewing it, because that will eliminate that stretch factor, and also the stitches don't look like it's swallowing the garment. So now that we've done that, I'm going to move on to the neck before I do the sleeves, just because I tried on the dress and I've kind of like it without the sleeves. I think it looks a bit better. So I'm just going to finish the neck first, and we're going to do that using elastic. Now it's the last step, so time to hem the neck and the armholes. By looking at the results of this, it looks looks complicated, but it's the easiest thing ever. So to get the perfect length of elastic, I finger pinned it around the circumference, then stretched it really slightly so it fits taut around me when I wear it, and then I cut it. I overlapped the elastic and sewed it with a wide zigzag stitch to get a loop, and then pinned it right sides facing the neck and armholes. Now I need to quickly talk about the elastic I'm using, because you can't use regular elastic. It needs to be fold over elastic, which folds, but this is because it has a thinner area in the middle, which reduces the bulk a normal elastic would create. So you want to pin this right sides facing your neck and armholes, then sew on the edge with a zigzag stitch, not too wide this time. Then once you've done that, fold the elastic over so it's on the wrong side of the fabric, pin it in place and sew with a zigzag stitch, but keep in mind it's a hemming stitch, so change your stitch settings to what you were using for your other hems. I quickly want to explain an alternative method to finish the hem, and that's with the actual fabric. So you could create a band, probably about that sound Australian. I would create a band probably about 2 centimeters wide and measure the length the same way we did the elastic. Bear in mind this method can only really be done on quite stretchy fabric, otherwise you'll struggle to get it over your head. But basically you want to sew the side seam, fold it in half with the right sides facing out, then give this an iron for a crisp edge. Then pin the raw edge right sides facing your neck and armhole, overlock and zigzag it, give it a press, and you're done. And that's the dress done. Really easy to do, but of course I managed to make it long. Anywho, let's go on to the final reveal.